Hi there, it's Archie. I'm back for yet another special edition of the ADHD Care podcast. And just to kickstart things, I'll have a special guest that will be joining me virtually. I've got Arron Hutchinson. He works for the ADHD Foundation. It's a neurodiversity charity based in the UK, and we are discussing all things transitioning for young people moving from primary to secondary school. That's a discussion that I also had in the last episode of the podcast with another special guest, Zoe Beezer. And some of you might remember that I had Arron on as a guest when I went to the neurodiversity conference that took place in Liverpool a few months back. And so it's a pleasure to catch up with Arron today. Let's see if technology is gonna let us bring Arron on virtually via Zoom.
Hi Archie, you okay?
Hi Arron.
How you doing?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Sorry about the late start.
Oh, you're all right, don't worry.
Typically ADHD fashion, as you know.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm late for everything. I get it. Don't worry. No problem at all.
So here we are yet again.
Yeah. I listened to the podcast from the conference. I thought it was great.
It was amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah. When I kind of spoke to you on the day, I thought, oh, that's ambitious, recording a podcast from the whole day. But I thought it came out fantastic. I thought it was really good.
Did.
Recording in progress.
I was just pressing record before I forget as well.
Yeah.
So that we can have a video for the podcast as well. So, yeah, good to see you again. And hopefully you're having a great summer.
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks. Just got back from, I was away in Spain last week, so that was nice. So landed in Manchester on Monday, and it was absolutely battering down. So it was quite a nice welcome back to reality there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've had horrible weather, as you've pointed out there. So, yeah, I wanted to bring you on for us to discuss about all things sort of transition, really, for youngsters moving from primary school to secondary school. Obviously, that's something that's pending. That's going to happen in the next sort of month or so. So,
yeah,
and I'm as you know, through my work as well, I'll come across a lot of young people and parents who are expressing a lot of anxiety around this phase that these young people are going through. So I thought maybe we can have a discussion and just get your expert, because I know you do some talks, you work with schools on kind of these the issues around transition as well. So maybe we can discuss that. And I've got a series of questions that I want to throw at you as well that some of my clients have been sending to me. And by all means, let's have this as a discussion.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah.
So just to maybe if you just tell our listeners, I've tried my best to give you a nice introduction, which you will hear eventually when the podcast goes out. Do you want to tell us who you are, what you do within the ADHD Foundation?
Yeah, great. Yeah, so my name's Arron. I am the Education Training Director for the ADHD Foundation. So majority of my work is doing training for schools around ADHD, but kind of the whole umbrella of neurodiversity as well, ways of kind of working with youngsters who have ADHD or working with neurodivergent youngsters and trying to sort of unlock that potential and get the most out of them, I suppose, because we know there's so many positive traits that come with being neurodiverse as well. So that's a lot of my role is doing training, but we also kind of a couple of days a week, I go into schools as a therapeutic practitioner. So I go in and do some interventions around sort of managing anxiety and things like that. And the last sort of summer term, was always a lot of kids that I was working with. It was around that kind of transition of especially going to secondary school with some of the year sixes I was working with. And my background before I started working for the foundation was in teaching. So I was a primary school teacher for about 5 years, most of the time working with year six. So I kind of dealt with a lot of that transition anxiety as well. So it's something that's very, very prevalent in a lot of kids, especially those who are neurodivergent as well, and those with ADHD. So it's a topic that I'm really passionate about. It's something that I really kind of want to be able to help parents with, want to be able to empower parents to kind of have those conversations, because it can be really difficult. And when ADHD is in the mix as well, it can be even more challenging sometimes. But there's lots we can do to help, and there's lots we can do to support, because it's as you've kind of alluded to, anxiety-inducing time for parents as well, I suppose. And it feels like for most parents that I speak to, it was only yesterday that they were in reception, and now all of a sudden they're going off into secondary school, or might even be that they're going off to university or college or something like that. And it just seems to come so quickly, and it can be quite daunting. So yeah, something that I'm really, really happy to talk about, and I'm really, really pleased to be here and be on.
Amazing. And for anyone that's not familiar with ADHD Foundation, do you want to just tell us briefly what it is, the charity organisation?
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because I would have got told off for not doing that. So I appreciate you pointing that out. So yeah, so we are a neurodiversity charity. We're based in Liverpool, so we kind of support people across the lifespan, really. So in the local area, we do a lot of work with parents and carers, and we do interventions, like I've said before, so direct work with children and young people, but then kind of across the country and globally, we do a lot of training, getting a lot of international schools interested now as well, which is great. We can kind of spread the word abroad as much as possible. And then we have an adult online therapy service as well. So neurodivergent adults will have counselling sessions, online counselling sessions, with a specific focus on neurodiversity as well. So we have a team of therapists who are qualified counsellors but specialising in neurodiversity. So we get a load of good feedback from that, because often, and me myself having ADHD, I've had various different kind of sessions of counselling and different kind of blocks of counselling in the past, and the ones that I've found really useful are the ones that they seem to get and understand neurodiversity, and they understand ADHD, and that's really helped me. So that's something we're kind of passionate about too. So we kind of offer a variety of services sort of across the lifespan, and then we try and produce as much, sort of, because we're a non-for-profit, try and produce as much free content as possible. So we've got on our website, which I'll have a little chat about at some point, a resource hub with loads of free information for parents, for children, young people themselves, for adults with ADHD, loads of free stuff on the website too. So definitely something worth having a look at.
Excellent. And speaking of your foundation, I attended the recent Umbrella project, the one that took place in Bromley. A few weeks ago, actually, and I met Josh, was one of your colleagues that I met at the conference. So that was another amazing event that they put out, and saw the umbrellas, and it was very colourful. And for anyone that hasn't seen the umbrellas, I actually went live on our Facebook page on that day. So anyone who wants to have a look on that event, particularly that took place, as I said, a few weeks ago, just look on our ADHD Care on Facebook. So yeah, coming back to the transition. So where do we start with this one? It's quite it's quite a broad topic, really, but essentially, let's look at it from a young person's point of view initially. Certainly, they're enjoying their summer holidays. The reality is going to sink in that in a few weeks' time, they are going back to school. So by now, anyway, most of them would have often gone to visit the school. There would have been some sort of preparation work that would have been done in terms of kind of preparing them for that transition. So what would be your advice for any young person listening to this that's about to go through this kind of transition phase? That's probably the first question I would want to ask, really.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say, and the first thing that I say to anyone in that position, is I think recognizing that you're not alone can be helpful sometimes, and I think occasionally when we're in these periods of transition, especially, going from primary to secondary school, because you're the one having that anxiety response, that physical response, and you're the one experiencing it, it can be very easy to forget that actually all of the people in your year group are going through the exact same thing. And whether you're going to a school where lots of people from your previous school, or whether you're going to school where nobody, there's going to be an element of anxiety there. And I think I would say, firstly, it's absolutely natural and it's normal and it's okay to feel like that. I think if someone was going into a completely different environment and they weren't worried at all, I often say to kids, most people will have a level of anxiety around it. Some people, they might put up a bit of a bravado, I suppose, and they might say, no, I'm not worried, but we know that everyone is going to be in that position. And I think it can be really, really hard, especially with ADHD in the mix and that kind of emotional dysregulation. It can be really, our brain can be working against us sometimes, and it can jump to those extremes, and we can feel like it is the end of the world, and we kind of start catastrophizing and thinking of all of the worst possible solutions and all the worst possible outcomes, and everything that's possibly going to happen when we get there. The first bit of advice I would give would just to recognize that, one, it's absolutely normal to feel like that, and it's absolutely okay to feel like that. And whether they let on or not, everyone else in your cohort will be feeling exactly the same way, if not to a lesser extent, will be feeling a similar way. And recognizing as well that there's lots of stuff that we can do to manage that. And 9 times out of 10, the things that we're worried about and the things that we're kind of preempting and thinking this might happen, that might happen, they might not happen. And they might not happen to the kind of degree that we will think it was. It might not be as severe as it is. And there's always going to be kind of things to worry about, but there's lots we can do to work with that as well. So that'd be my first thing, I suppose, just kind of recognizing that it's fine to feel like that, and that lots of people will be as well.
Yeah, and you know, we've all been through transition as well. You know, yourself, myself, and you know, I suppose the message here to put across that it's not just them going through it, and they're not, you know, they're not going through this phase by themselves. It's normal to feel anxious. It's normal to feel worried. Yes. You know, you hear about, you know, moving from a big, you know, smaller school, nurturing school to a bigger school. It's obviously quite anxiety provoking, but certainly what you find is once they've gone through those kind of first few weeks, they've kind of starting to find their feet a bit more. Things start to make a bit more sense to them, and they have already done. Some of them have already done their transition from, when they left, for example, when they left reception class to moving when they moved from preschool to reception class. So these transitions do happen all the time, and it's just that it feels like it's another big chapter that they're going into. But yeah.
And I think that's it, isn't it? Those kind of, we sometimes don't give ourselves enough credit for what we have already done. You will have been through many transitions, as you say, and dealt with them successfully, and it's been fine, and everything's, you know, worked out okay. But we don't give ourselves credit for that a lot of the time. I think a lot of the time we can focus on, no, I can't do this, but actually you will have done this before. It might feel different, and then in years to come, you probably look back at this time, and this will feel like not a lot as well. It won't feel that severe as well when you're moving on to the next transition, going to college or going to do an apprenticeship or whatever that is that you're going to be doing in the future. This transition now will feel trivial in comparison to that. And I think we're always kind of building on those skills. But I think you're right. It's important to give ourselves credit for what we've already done. And we have already managed this transition, and it's in the past, or managed similar transitions in the past. They've worked well. Everything's turned out okay. And it will be the same here. And there are, of course, going to be problems. There are going to be things that come up that we like about the new school, things that we don't like. But it's never going to be perfect. And the things that we're not keen on, there's things that we can work with, and there's ways that we can manage it. And I think as well, sometimes it's important to remember that the staff at the new school, you may well have met some of them. I think it's important to remember that the staff at the new school totally understand what you're going through, and have done this year in, year out. Every September, there's a new group of kids that come through to the school. Yeah. And they know what you're going through. They understand. They've seen it all before. So it's important not to feel like that they're not going to understand. And, you know, we might find stuff that we kind of gravitate towards more than others. And there might be some people that we can go to for advice, and some people that we maybe think, oh, I might go to someone else instead. And that's fine. And that's just part of the process of finding your feet, I suppose, as you say, and working it out in the first few weeks.
And some of the things that usually cause them the anxiety, usually what you find, which is they're all reasonable things, like the big environment that they're moving into, friendships, that often comes up quite a lot when I speak to young people, because I usually ask them, what is it that you're particularly worried about? Some of them worry that they might not fit in, or not have any friends, or struggle to make friends. Things like the lessons as well, the amount of lessons, the amount of work that they would have to do, the homework, not to mention the actual environment that they're in, having to navigate from one end of the school to the other. Yeah. And then certainly, I think your ADHD is being tested to that limit, isn't it? If you think about it, your organizational skills, your time management, your planning, your everything else. and certainly the independence that's required of them moving to that secondary school, and them growing up and becoming more self-aware of what they're good at and some of the things that they struggle at. I think that's all of that plays into the anxiety. So these are some of the things I'm sure you've come across as well anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think everything you've said is what I often like to do is when I'm working with someone, if they're worried about a particular thing like this, which go into secondary school, we'll try and externalize all of those worries. So we'll write them all down and just make a list of everything that's of concern or everything that's causing anxiety about going to secondary school or about this transition. And often those are the things that come up. So moving to that bigger environment, new teachers and feeling like they might be different to your primary school teachers and feeling like you're not sure how to interact with them or how they're going to be with you. The lessons getting harder, maybe getting lost sometimes is something that comes up quite a lot because we don't really have to maneuver ourselves about primary school too much. We're in that classroom all day. We know our way to the dinner hall, and we've got a lot, sort of 7 years to get used to that. And then suddenly we're dropped into this big environment where we've got to find our own way around and all of that sort of stuff. So it can be really daunting. And as I say, it's completely understandable why we might feel daunted by that. And when you throw ADHD in the mix as well with some of the difficulties that you may have with your ADHD, if you're worried about your organizational skills or if you're worried about your memory and you feel like you can forget things, sometimes it can add to that feeling of this isn't going to go well and I'm going to get this wrong. But I think a couple of things to remember is that one, schools nowadays, I think we've got a long way to go, but the knowledge is really increasing around ADHD, and lots of teachers that we work with have got great knowledge on ADHD and know exactly what to do, what to look out for, how to support, and we'll put the kind of appropriate support in place for you. So it can feel like we're going to be completely left on our own. It's often not the case, and there will be a level of understanding there, and there will be support in place for anyone going through that transition. And I think as well with friendships, I think ADHD can make that difficult sometimes. And as you've said, that feeling like you're not going to fit in. One thing we know, and lots of us with ADHD will have experienced, is maybe feeling a little bit different or feeling a bit isolated to those around you if you process things in a different way, if you maybe are quite impulsive and you interrupt people in conversations quite a lot and you're not necessarily trying to be rude, it's just something that happens, or if you struggle with your attentional regulation and sometimes someone might be talking to you and you might kind of drift off and think about something else, and it's not that you're being intentionally rude, it's just the way that your brain works sometimes. So they can all cause anxiety, real anxiety as well around, am I going to fit in? Are people going to understand me? Will people think that I'm being rude? Will people think that I'm not listening to them? Will people think that I'm interrupting them all the time and I'm not interested in what they've got to say? And all of this stuff can cause a lot of anxiety. But I think it's also important to remember that at the age you're at, going to secondary school, your brain is still in development, your brain is still growing. So the things that you might struggle with, you might always struggle with, but you will kind of find ways of managing them a little bit better, and you'll learn more about yourself as your brain develops, and you'll find ways of managing those things. And we know that 1 in 20 of us have got ADHD, so you are not going to be the only person in that school who's experiencing the same thing and having very similar worries around your ADHD and how that might affect you going into secondary school. There's going to be lots of other kids in the school in a very similar position. And I find that those of us who are neurodivergent, whether we know it or not, tend to kind of gravitate towards each other a lot of the time. And there just seems to kind of be this invisible force that we just kind of on the same wavelength, I suppose. So when kids are worried about going to secondary school with friendships, I totally get it and I totally understand it. But I also think on the other side, and just sort of flipping the narrative, it's also a great opportunity to sort of find your people, I suppose. When you're in primary school, you're forced into a class with these 30 kids, and some of them you really might not get along with at all, but you have got to stick with them for the 7 years that you're in primary school. You might get along with a couple of them, you might not get along with anyone, you might have a real difficult time with that. But when you go into secondary school, one of the benefits of it being a bigger environment with a lot more students, while that can seem very daunting, it's also more opportunity to make better friends and form really solid relationships and kind of find your people, as I say, I suppose.
Yeah. And some young people move between schools anyway. Even in primary school, you might find they might change school and things, so they would have probably gone through another transitional sort of phase within that. Just touching on what you were saying about what you used to work at, because you worked as a primary school teacher, I'm quite interested to find out what preparations are done as a teacher in year 6 for students that are about to move to secondary school, just to get an insight into exactly how do you prepare youngsters for that transition.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, we have the sort of the standard stuff with the transition days for high schools and things like that. When I was teaching, and just speaking from personal experience, it was something I was very aware of, and something that I really wanted to make sure that the kids in my care, in my class, did feel ready, or at least better equipped to make that transition and to make that big step, that next sort of chapter in their lives. So we would do in the summer term, especially when we've got all those horrible exams out the way and all of that sort of stuff, we'd be really focusing on what we're worried about, working through using kind of PSHE sessions to talk about it and just try and normalize some of those feelings a little bit. But actually, I think the earlier we can do it, the better. So it would be something that we'd be talking about from as early on in year 6 as possible, and starting to think about how are we feeling about next year, and what are we worried about. And I would always make the parents' evenings that I had in year 6, we'd obviously talk about how they were getting on in class, but I dedicated a lot of time in those parents' evenings to talk about that transition to secondary school, because I think that is probably one of the most important things about that year. And, the government might disagree, or Ofsted might disagree, and in terms of grades and things like that, I think the most important thing for a year 6 student is feeling prepared to make that step and to make that transition from the end. So we put a lot of work into doing that. And I think sometimes it depends on the secondary school and how cooperative they are. And we were lucky where I worked to work with some really great secondary schools, really supportive. And we had a few that would organise like Zoom sessions where they would, the head of year or pastoral lead or someone from the school, that a face that they're going to recognise, would Zoom into us, and the students that go into that school would sit and they could ask any questions that they wanted. And that was on top of their transition days as well. So I think working in collaboration is definitely something that's really, really helpful. Is we can do as much as we can in primary school. And if we've got that collaboration from the secondary school as well, that's really gonna help as much as possible.
I was talking to another teacher a while ago regarding some students that have like a pupil passport, or something that they can transition with, that tells the secondary school about the young person's strengths, issues that they might need support with, and things. Is that something that you are familiar with, and is that something that would help with the transition as well?
Yeah, definitely. So it's something that we used to do. For all our students, we would create this pupil passport, and you'll find like lots of templates for this online, and loads of people have kind of created their own versions of this. But exactly what you say, it would be about their strengths, what they like, what they don't like, the kind of preferred style of learning, maybe what is going to help them if they're struggling, what they're worried about, just as much information as possible, and then pass that on to the secondary school. I would always make an effort as a year 6 teacher to have a point of contact for all of the schools that the kids were going to. And it's different in different areas. Where I was working, there was quite a big mix of schools that the kids would go to. So I'd make a point of having someone to contact from each of them, send those passports on, making sure that they are being used, explaining the importance of them. Something that I'm finding with some of the secondary schools we're working with now as well is that they'll keep that and they'll take it and they'll use it within school as well, because one of the sort of scary things about secondary school, like we've already mentioned, is that kind of having to go around all these places. And in primary, you've got that one teacher that you see all day every day, and you get really used to them, and they know you really well because they're with you all day every day. And then suddenly you might only see a teacher for 1 hour a week if it's a certain lesson, and you might not see them for another 2 weeks. So schools have been using those passports to kind of the kids will keep them on them, and they'll take them from class to class. And while they're in year 7, as the teachers are getting used to their new cohort of kids, and as they're getting used to what they like, what they don't like, they've always got that to refer to as something to go back with. So that's something that I would definitely recommend and speak to. Obviously we're in the summer holidays now, but speaking to the new school about that, and if there's something that's already in place. If you've got someone who's going into year 6 next year, definitely worth speaking to the primary school about that and seeing if that's something we can put in place ready for them to make that transition. But if they're already there in the summer now, which is why I imagine most people will be listening, speaking to the secondary school if we've not kind of heard of this before, and seeing what do they have and is there anything that they do have that can kind of help with that. And I think that for parents, that's something that can be quite hard at times, and it can be, depending on experiences we've had with having conversations with school, I think it can be difficult to have that conversation about your child's needs and try and support them as much as possible. The one thing that I would say is, you know, the vast majority of teachers are in the profession because they care. And speaking from personal experience, if anyone came to me and said, my child's worried about this or they're struggling with this, I saw it as my job to do what I could to support them. And I think the same can be said for the vast majority of teachers. They're in this profession because they care. So it can be hard sometimes if we've had difficult experiences. But I think as a parent, just remembering that the likelihood is that you will be supported if you do contact. And even if we just it's just a weight off our shoulders a little bit if we speak to the school and just say they're a little bit worried about this, even just externalizing that and talking about it, 9 times out of 10, you'll find that the school will have some sort of support in place already. So if they're worried about getting lost in the first week, for example, chances are the first day, often in schools, it's just the year 7s in, and maybe the rest come in later on in the day, or they come in the next day, and they use that time to make sure that the kids are familiar with things. And I've not heard of many year 7 teachers punishing kids for being late to a lesson in the first week because they got lost. I think there is that level of understanding there. And I think sometimes just having that conversation with the school can make us realise that, because, you know, we go to these transition days and it's all about the uniform and everything and all of the kind of logistical stuff. But so unless we ask the questions, we might think, oh, that's going to be a concern. But often when we'll ask, we find that, oh yeah, don't worry about it. They're not going to get in trouble if they're late for the first lesson because they got lost. And sometimes just having that conversation can make us feel better about it, I suppose.
Yeah. What is there in place from a secondary school point of view for these young people that are moving into that year 7? What is there? So you mentioned there about what year 6 is, what you would do as a class teacher there, but once they've transitioned, what is it that they have in place to support young people with ADHD specifically that are coming into their school? And what usually happens during that first sort of few weeks of the start of the term?
Yeah, so as I've mentioned, it's very common for lots of secondary schools to stagger the sort of starting of the school year with different year groups. So they might have the year 7s, they come in the morning, and then the rest of the school will come in the afternoon. Or it might even be that the year 7s come in on the Monday and the rest of the school will come in on the Tuesday, just to give them the space and the time and the sort of freedom to get used to that environment. And it doesn't seem as daunting that we haven't got 6-foot people walking around in school uniform as well. And it just having that day or that morning, that's very common for a lot of schools. And I think that really helps. It certainly helped me when I was at school. I had a similar experience that the first day was just us as year 7s, and it made a massive difference for me. And it just felt a lot less daunting, because by the time the rest of the kids came in the next day, I was familiar with the environment. So it was just one less kind of factor in the anxiety, I suppose, because the things I was worried about was the big environment, but also the big kids that were going to be there as well. So that was just one less thing on that first day. So that when I came in on the second day, I was maybe still a little bit worried about the other kids coming in, but I'd already got used to the environment in that first day. So it was just one less thing. So it didn't kind of feel like a load of kind of danger at once, I suppose. What else is quite common is for the transition days, as we've already mentioned, which we would have passed, and then also just kind of using the first few weeks to, most teachers aren't going to just dive straight into all the heavy content. It will be getting used to the strengths and the kind of areas of development for the kids in the class, and recapping on what they know already, and kind of talking through what we're going to be learning in year 7 and how the rest of the year is going to work. And I think, again, sometimes it can feel like these lessons are going to be horrible. They're going to be really hard. We're going to get thrown straight into them. And the first few weeks are often used for just kind of getting used to things, seeing where we're at. Because we all know the 6 weeks of summer, we might have left primary school in a great position with some lessons, and then we have those 6 weeks and we can have completely forgotten what it was that we'd learned. Yeah. And teachers know that, and teachers understand that, and they'll use that time to really try and nurture the kids in year 7 through those first few weeks, and not just throw them in at the deep end straight away. I think specifically for kids with ADHD, especially with a diagnosis, the SENCO or the SEN team in a secondary school will be aware of which kids are diagnosed with certain conditions which aren't as they come into school, and making sure that the staff know about that, and the staff have the right knowledge and the right strategies to support the kids in their class, whether they've got ADHD, whether they're autistic, whatever the kind of the condition is that we're dealing with. The SEN team will focus solely on that. And I think that's one of the benefits of a secondary school as well. I think just trying to flip that sort of anxiety around again. I think one of the things that can make us quite anxious is that there's all of these new adults and there's so many of them. But I think the benefit of that is that actually we've got all of these adults who've got very specific focused roles and know what they're doing and know how to look after us best. And I think in primary school, we're often wearing a lot of different hats. I used to call myself a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none when I was in primary school. I'm not saying about all primary school teachers. I'm saying that about myself. I have to be careful with that. Saying that about myself. But we'll often find, in a primary school, you might have a SENCO who's also a class teacher as well, and is also an assistant head, and has all of these different roles that we're trying to juggle. Whereas in a high school, because there's that bigger staff team, the SEN team and the team that are responsible for making sure the kids with ADHD, for example, are supported in the best way possible, often that will be their kind of main focus and their sole focus, so that they really can make sure that the support is in place and that they're doing what they need to do. So it's that kind of phase transition in, recognizing that the teachers will understand that they've had 6 weeks off, all the anxiety that comes with moving to a new school, all of that sort of stuff is going to be at play, and they're not just going to throw them in at the deep end straight away. And the likelihood is they're not going to get in trouble for getting lost on the first week. And I think a level of understanding that's there is the main thing that secondary schools do to support. I think they'll also make sure that you've got those points of contact in the school as well. So while it might be hard to remember every teacher's face and every teacher's name, there will be certain members of staff who they're the person to go to, or they're the person to speak to. So you've got your form tutor, so someone that you are going to see every day, which again can feel a little bit more similar to primary school, and it's quite a nice way of phasing through to secondary school. Is we do have that person going to see every morning. And I remember my form tutor, when I first started, the first week he just played a game every single morning, and it was just, if he could remember all of our names, and he would go from start to finish and he'd just try and name as many as he could. But it was just quite a nice way of just easing us in, and it was really friendly, and it just felt like, oh, I'm in primary school again when I'm in this room, and it just kind of felt very familiar and very nice. And I think having those points of contact, they'll be made very kind of clear to you or to your child on the first few weeks of secondary school. You'll know who your form tutor is because you'll see them every day. You'll know who your head of year is. You might have already met them with transition days and things. And the pastoral team will make themselves known as well. And the SEN team, if you've got ADHD or any other condition, the SEN team will make themselves known. And you'll start to figure out who is the person to go to for certain things. And it might take a few weeks to do that, but I think schools are doing a fantastic job with everything else that they've got to do. Schools are doing a fantastic job of making sure that transition is effective, and secondary schools play a big role in that. And I think the level of understanding that's there really, really helps with that.
You talking there, I'm just thinking around teacher training and their knowledge and awareness of neurodiversity conditions such as ADHD and autism. And obviously that's something that's evolved over the years, and I know you play a key role in going up and down the country, internationally now from the sound of it, training and raising awareness of neurodiversity needs in young people, which is great. How much of that is having an impact? Certainly from my work, I can clearly see that there is much more of an understanding and some sort of awareness from some teachers. But what you find in a secondary school, which is, again, parents have anxieties around, is you might have one or two teachers that are really on board, seems to understand your young person, kind of embracing, making all the accommodations that have been recommended, but you might have one or two that are still maybe struggling to understand or maybe fully support your young person there, which comes with having so many teachers, isn't it, in secondary school?
Yeah.
So so I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I agree, and it's something that I've experienced as well. And in an ideal world, everyone would be on board and everyone would be knowing what they're doing in terms of neurodiversity. I think most teachers do, and I think that's important to remember, is that the those that might be a little bit reluctant to support and put support in place, they are in the minority. But like with anything, it's easier to kind of think about the negative side of things, and we focus in on that a lot more. And they are in the minority, and whether they're in the minority or the majority, they can still have a significant impact on a child or a young person. And if someone is having a really tough time with someone who isn't putting the support in place for one reason or another, it might be lack of understanding, it might be a kind of reluctance to do that. Obviously, I can't speak for everyone. That can have an impact, but I think remembering that the majority will know and will support. And from my experience going into schools, we'll often find that there's so many teachers who are on board, and that understanding is the main thing that's grown, I think, as you allude to. And I think that's the first step, actually. I think we can talk about strategies and support strategies all day, and we can talk about 1,000,001 different things that we can do to support, but that understanding has to be there first. And I find if we don't have that understanding, we might put a support strategy in place and it can quickly go out the window if we don't actually know why we're doing it. So the understanding is really important. I think that's something that is growing in the majority of teachers, and lots of teachers and lots of schools are really, really on board. But I totally understand the kind of anxiety that can come around having such a big staff team, and wondering, statistically, not all of them are going to have the same attitude towards things, and that is just going to be the case, and that's just a fact of it. But I think knowing what you can do as a parent to sort of support your child as best you can if they are having a difficult experience, and finding out, whether we know or not already from any transition days, who's the person to talk to if we've got any concerns, and going with that, and going with having those conversations, and going with kind of evidence and knowledge, I suppose. So not necessarily kind of writing down every little thing that's happened, but if we know that your child really, really benefits when the teacher does X, Y, and Z, and you know that because their maths teacher is doing it, but maybe their English teacher isn't, going with that and saying, I'm not being confrontational, I'm not trying to kind of have a go at that teacher, I'm just saying he's doing really well in his maths because of this, this, and this, because this teacher's doing all of this for him. I'm a bit worried that he's going to struggle in his English because that's not happening. What can be done? And just asking that question. And like I said before, that, if anyone ever came to me with any concerns, it can be daunting to do, and it can be a thing that we think we don't really want to do. We don't want to bother them, or maybe we've had difficult experiences, but majority of teachers would really welcome that conversation. And it might, as I've said already, if we're talking to the teacher themselves, it might not necessarily be a reluctance of, I'm not doing that, I don't want to do that, I don't believe in ADHD or anything like that. I think the attitude's still there in some people, but I think it's very much fading as time goes on. It might just be that they don't have that understanding, or they might have missed the training day, or they might have, there could be a load of different reasons why they don't have that understanding there. The majority of teachers are in the profession because they care. As I've mentioned, if we have that conversation with them in, a non-confrontational way, we're just saying, this is what's going to help, this is what's going to support. Most teachers would respond well to that and would think, actually, do you know what, maybe I will try this, maybe I will try something else. And if that's not going well, who else can we go to instead? And there will be dedicated members of staff to help with that, whether that's the head of year, whether that's the pastoral team, whether that's the SEND team. We'll kind of figure it out who it is in that school, and kind of go to them if we do have any further concerns. And I think when we're having those conversations as parents as well, sometimes it can be helpful to go armed, not literally armed, but armed with sort of resources and knowledge. So using kind of other things that you've read online. So we've got on our website, we've got a free to download parent's guide to ADHD, as well as a teacher's guide to ADHD. Print them off, have a look at them, and you can take them into the conversations with you. And I often find when I'm working with parents and we're having these conversations with members of staff in school, having something else external to refer to can really help, because it just doesn't feel as personal, and it just doesn't feel like it's just us going at them with our concerns, and that is the point of the conversation. But if we've got something else to refer to, I think it just gives a bit of weight to our points sometimes, and it doesn't feel like this battle, and it kind of reduces some of the sort of the stress around those conversations.
It goes back to the point about the people passport that we were talking about. If there is something that centers around the description of the young person's strengths, the things that they struggle with, that can be used as another a form of discussion as well, where you can look at their targets, goals, how they are doing in that new environment based on, you know, all the things that were identified previously when they were still in primary school. And I like the point about the resources that you mentioned there. I know there used to be some advocacy sort of services like I remember from like years ago, they used to be called Parent Partnership, but I think they've renamed something else now. But I think they're ex-teachers that can support parents or act on like an advocacy sort of type advisory service for teachers, for parents. Don't quote me, but I think I've got the details somewhere. But definitely, I think that's another channel that parents can maybe explore. But certainly, you'd want there to be that dialogue between the teachers and the parents, to have that relationship from the onset, where there's regular communication. If there is opportunities for meetings as well, where just to check in to see how, you know, the young person is progressing during that settling in period, if they are on treatment as well, just to get the teacher's view of how the young person and their observation of the young person, and if there is anything that will be quite useful for parents to be made aware of, be it via, you know, as I said, a meeting or via an email, just to keep that, you know, that's something that I'll often sort of mention to parents, just to, you know, that can ease some of their anxieties, because it can, as you say, it can feel a bit quite overwhelming, like who do I go to, and I'm getting sort of mixed feedback from, you know, one teacher saying this and the other teacher saying completely the opposite. So
that's the sort of frustrating thing about that bigger staff team, isn't it? Is that mixed feedback, and actually who do I believe, and actually it's just about perspective. And sometimes a certain teacher might see certain traits and certain characteristics, but they might not see in another lesson. But there could be a million and one reasons for that. You know, it could be that the person in the other lesson has got loads of support in place for them, so they're not seeing some of those responses, maybe those negative responses that the other teachers see. And so, as you say, that open communication and having that dialogue, as kind of overwhelming as that can feel sometimes, I think is really, really important. And I think starting off by just trusting that I'm going to have this conversation and it's going to go well, but knowing that if it doesn't, there are other options as well, and the support we can get externally. We could maybe go to someone else in the school, and if that's still not working, as you've mentioned there, we could kind of externalize this and go to another group for support and advice. Something that I'd recommend as well is so Attitude magazine, which lots of parents might be familiar with, online resource. They've got some good articles on there. If you go on the website and you put in the search bar about transition, they've got some good articles there on that, and they've got articles about kind of managing difficult conversations with school staff as well, and things to say, maybe things to avoid saying. And I've kind of directed a lot of parents to those links, and a lot of them have reported that they find them quite useful as well. And it's kind of gives you kind of both sides of it, and just enables us to have that positive conversation without it becoming a confrontation, I suppose, which is always the kind of the worry about these things, is that it's just going to turn into this negative conversation. It's not going to feel nice for anyone. And actually, I think just remembering that we're all there for the same reason. We're all there to support your child. We're all there to get the best out of them and make sure that they're managing things okay. So just having some tips to manage those conversations can help. And as I say, the kind of different perspectives of different members of staff can be really tricky to manage. I always remember one parents' evening that I had when I was in secondary school, and I had a particular maths teacher who I just didn't really click with, and there was kind of not a lot of support there. And I think, you know, there was, and I take responsibility. I'm not kind of blaming them wholeheartedly, but there was a bit of a difficult relationship there. And I remember one parents' evening, my dad, I was sat with him and we went around all of these different teachers, and loads of them were giving, like, you know, really nice feedback, saying loads of nice things about me and you know, how well I was doing and I try hard. And then we sat with this teacher and it was very, very negative, and it was, I'm lazy and I don't try hard enough and all of this sort of stuff. But actually just remembering, my dad said at the time, he actually had a bit of a sort of difficult conversation with her at the time around the fact that I've just spoken to 10 other teachers who've all said the complete opposite to that. And actually sometimes the statistics tell us the real story. And it was that maybe there needed to be some adaptations in that class that were happening in other classes as well. So, but that can be really hard to manage. But I think just focusing on those positives and knowing that actually, if the majority of teachers are saying that they're trying really hard, they're doing their best, all of that sort of stuff, everything that you want to hear, if the teachers who are supporting them are saying that, but other teachers aren't, I think that's when we maybe need to start looking into, are they actually being supported in those other classes or not?
Yeah. Just to come to parents, again, we've touched on kind of like what teachers can do and what the young person needs to be aware of, particularly during this kind of phase of transition. But what tips and advice can you give to parents that are trying to support young people going through this transition period?
Yeah, I think one is just remembering the way that their brain operates and the part of their brain that they're kind of operating from when they are stressed and worried about it. And we often quote Dr. Russell Barkley around those with ADHD being around a third behind with their emotional maturation, and that's kind of pre-pandemic as well. So that thrown into the mix, it's probably even more behind in my opinion. And just remembering, what part of the brain they're operating from, and if they're not operating from that frontal lobe or that prefrontal cortex where they can think logically about things, if they're really stressed about something, chances are they're operating from that limbic system or the chimp brain, as Dr. Steve Peters calls it, that kind of feeling like it's the end of the world and that fight, flight or freeze response. And I think when we're kind of interacting with our children and we can see them having real emotional episodes, or maybe they completely shut down and it's that freeze response, just remembering that they might say things that they don't necessarily mean at that moment in time, or they might kind of do things that they're not really thinking through. And it's just about remembering that they're operating from that part of the brain, and when they feel calm again, and eventually they will, that's probably the better time to have those conversations. And I think when they are experiencing those big emotions, often the best thing to do is just allow that space for them to do that. And might be necessary to intervene sometimes if safety is a concern or anything like that. But if everyone's safe, everything's fine, just allowing them that space. And then when they're feeling calm again, they'll then start operating from the part of their brain that allows them to think logically about things. And you can then start reflecting on things and talking things through. And some of the other kind of day-to-day things that I would definitely recommend, I think, one, using the school's website and going on and trying to just familiarize as much as possible and not just relying on those transition days that we might have already had, and they might not have, and you might not have as a parent remembered everything when you've been to the school or been to any open evenings with parents, or they might not have remembered everything when they've been to those days because they're too busy dealing with the anxiety of it all, or you might be busy as a parent dealing with the anxiety of it all, and it might be a lot of things that we've missed. And a lot of that information will be on the school website, and just taking time with your child to go through, familiarize them with pictures of staff, which lots of schools have got, which is really helpful. Lots of schools now, because of COVID, have got kind of virtual tours on their website when they couldn't do that back in the day, and they can be really helpful. Just something to watch every few days, or as regular as is kind of appropriate for you. Something to watch every few days, just trying to build that kind of familiarity as much as we possibly can before they get in there. One thing that I often do as well, I've mentioned already, is just trying to externalize some of those worries. And it doesn't work for everyone, but lots of kids have found it quite helpful. And whether it's that they say it to us and we write it down, or they write it down themselves, whatever's kind of appropriate for you. But just trying to get those worries out of here and onto another format can really help sometimes. And I don't underestimate the power that can have. And we can think about it now and think, well, what good's writing it down going to do? But just that process of just removing it from up here and just trying to forget about it can really help. One thing that I often do is we'll write a list of all the things they're worried about high school. So it might be getting lost, might be teachers, it might be new lessons, whatever it is, might be friendships. Write a full list of all of that stuff. And then we go through each one, and we'll either come up with a solution, or if there isn't a solution possible, which sometimes there might not be, we'll come up with a coping strategy instead. So what can we do to feel better about it? So solution for getting lost, for example, might be, well, just remember that they're probably going to provide you with something to help you navigate your way around. There'll be plenty of people there to ask, and solution could be just asking someone else and asking the teacher that you're leaving where do I need to go, and just asking them to remind you, and they will understand and they will help you in that, especially in that first few weeks. So it might be that we come up with some sort of solution, or with friendships, if that's a worry, it might be that something we've tried in the past around, maybe we role play a few things. We think about, right, who do we know that's there already? Can we arrange to maybe meet them at the gate on the first day, and all of that sort of stuff? Or sometimes it might be that we don't have any solutions. So for that example, it might be friendships. There isn't anyone, that you're the only person that going to that new school. So yeah, that's really daunting, and that's completely normal to feel like that. So we maybe don't have a solution straight away, but what can we do to cope with that anxiety? And that's where we'd start looking at whatever works for us, whether it's the relaxation techniques, or like deep breathing, or some grounding techniques, or maybe having something physical, like a stress ball or a resistance band, or whatever it is that works for that person. But maybe just deciding, do we need a coping strategy, or is there a solution, or maybe both, and kind of working through. But just that process sometimes of getting it all on paper and going through each one can just help to ease some of that anxiety. And then that anxiety may well come back a few days later, but we can just do it again, and we can just revisit it. Yeah. And one thing I often do when we find, kind of for kids that I work with, when we've got the strategies in place and we've got things that we know work, so it might be that they actually do feel calmer when they engage in some deep breathing, and they've been practicing doing that. Whatever the strategies are, we write them down on like little cards, and you can get sort of a few quid off Amazon, little pocket-sized cards, and we just write them down on there. They can keep it in the pocket, so it's nice and subtle. No one's kind of looking at, they've got this big kind of breathing ball that they carry around with them everywhere if they're worried about attention being drawn to them. It's just a nice and subtle thing, something that you can look at, a quick reminder, and just bring you back into the present and into the moment if we're starting to stress and starting to worry. So externalizing things can be really helpful. And I think one thing that I would definitely recommend for parents as well, and it might seem like quite an obvious thing, is especially after that first week or even that first day, having something to look forward to. So if we can, our kind of timetable and our diaries allow us to, the night after the first day of school, is there something, even something small, that we can do that they can just look forward to? And maybe we'll stick that on a card as well, as just like a little remember that we're doing this later. So when we are feeling those moments of real anxiety, which we are going to feel at points on our first day at school for a lot of us, it's just something we can look at, do some of that breathing that maybe we've practiced, and think, right, well, I'll be there in a few hours. And just having that thing to look forward to can really help as well. It gives you kind of that light at the end of the tunnel, I suppose. So something that sounds quite obvious, I think, but something definitely worth pointing out. Yeah. One resource that I definitely recommend as well is just on the kind of the cards that I create. There's a resource called Cards Against Anxiety. It's nothing like Cards Against Humanity. It's nothing like that. But it's basically just little cards with loads of little tips and strategies for managing anxiety. And it's just something, again, that you can keep. You can practice a few, take out some that work, just something that you can keep on you as a little reminder for things. So, and I will say, we're not kind of affiliated with them or associated with them. It's just something that I've used myself, something that I've used with children and young people, and I've found it pretty affordable and pretty effective as well. So definitely something I'd recommend there as well.
Wow, amazing. Lots of tips and hints and support.
Yeah, sorry, I thought.
No, it's great. It's absolutely amazing. And for me, like hearing you saying it, some of it was quite useful for us as well. I think some of these things can work with anyone, not just young people with ADHD or neurodiversity issues. They can, you can have issues just with anxiety or worrying about that transition that we've been discussing, and you probably would find this quite useful as well. So
yeah, definitely. And I think for parents as well, it's not even just for kids. I think taking into consideration that your stress around your child transitioning into a new school is just as valid as theirs is, and kind of allowing ourselves to feel that and thinking, what can we do to sort of support ourselves as well? And any strategies that we use for kids are adaptable and applicable to adults as well. So I think it's important to remind ourselves of that sometimes.
How about extracurricular activities? Anything kind of sort of physical activities or things that they like, sports or any kind of things that might take their mind off things that could be used as a way of distraction or a way of venting whatever sort of emotions that they're experiencing because of that transition? Definitely,
yeah. And I think that's something that we know is so helpful in so many different ways, especially for kids with ADHD, is especially if they are hyperactive, that kind of having some sort of physical outlet, that exercise, really helps with our well-being and our mental health. Can help with sleep as well if that's an issue, which obviously can be for a lot of people with ADHD. Can really help with that kind of just needing to do something and needing to take our minds off something and distract ourselves as well. And I think that's, again, one of the positives about going to a secondary school is the opportunities that are there for extracurricular activities as well. And when I'm working with kids with ADHD or any kid, whether they've got ADHD or not, and they are worried about going to secondary school, another thing we'll do is, we'll write down those things we're worried about, but we have to come up with a load of positives as well. And I'll force them to come up with at least 5 positives, and we won't leave until they've got 5, because you will be able, and even if it's a small thing, we will be able to find 5 positives. And one that often comes up is new clubs and new opportunities and things. And I would definitely encourage, I definitely encourage parents, I definitely encourage kids to get them signed up to those things. And again, that can be daunting and that can be scary, but I think looking at the positives of it, if we're worried about friendships, it's another opportunity to meet new people in secondary school in a less formal setting. So if we're joining a football club or a dance club or whatever it is, we might meet someone that isn't in any of our other lessons, and because it's a more casual setting and it's not about the learning and the lesson, it might be a bit easier to kind of have those conversations and get to know people a little bit more. It's also an opportunity to get to know staff from the school on a sort of different level as well. And I think one thing that we often find is that when I work with kids in a secondary school and I ask them about their kind of favourite teachers and the people that they enjoy working with in school, often it will be a teacher that they are in some club with as well, and a teacher that's running some sort of extracurricular club. And I think that's just because they get to see a slightly different side to them, and they maybe let the guard down a little bit and it's a little bit more informal, and they get that personality, I suppose. So I think it's definitely something that I would recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. And most young people I speak to, like if some of them, if you ask them what their favorite subject is, they'll usually say PE or something that involves sort of physical movement. And it's a shame. I think obviously we can't really change the curriculum as much, but I think if they can try and incorporate a lot of physical exercise as much as possible, particularly as we know with young people the benefits that it has. So any form of exercise, it doesn't have to be a structured sort of lesson, but incorporating sort of any sort of movement or any kind of opportunities of them participating in something that involves them getting out of their seat and getting about and doing things that would maybe make them feel good. And we know what exercise does to us mentally. If that's something that could be maybe incorporated more, apart from just relying on PE, which isn't as often sometimes in most cases, and most lessons are done where the young person is having to sit down for a considerable long period of time. I was going to ask you that question around that actually, in terms of just the curriculum and how it's structured, which it hasn't changed much for a number of years.
No.
And if you think about young people with ADHD that struggle with sitting down, yes, we can make accommodations and say, have a movement break and you can have, all this, that and the other. But has there been any thought around maybe trying to change things a bit more to make it less sitting down for at least an hour and more kind of moving about and that sort of thing? Is that...
Yeah, definitely. It's something that we're really passionate about and something that we're trying to work on with schools that we work with. I think, whether we've got ADHD or not, as human beings, we're not built to sit down all day. We're still essentially hunter-gatherers, and we're not meant to just sit and be sedentary all day, all evening. But it's just the way our society is. And, I totally get, from being a teacher myself, I totally understand why we will spend a lot of time sitting down and just getting through the content and getting through the learning, because there is such a huge curriculum to get through in a very tight amount of time. So I totally understand that from teachers. But I think one thing that we're trying to help teachers to recognise, and there's so many great teachers doing this, is that we can still access the learning and we can still get through the same content, but make it more active and make it more physical. And there are little things that we can do. So one thing that we have is our ADHD Friendly Schools Awards. So schools will come to us and say they're interested in the award, and part of that is that they'll have training with us, and then they have 6 pledges that they have to kind of provide evidence for. So changes that they've made that have had a positive impact. And one of those is around increasing the physical activity and increasing the movement within the school. So we'll often suggest things like, within the lesson, are there any kind of little things that we can do if we can get them outside when the weather's nice and still doing the same learning, but just kind of getting them up and moving? When we're asking kids to kind of have a discussion rather than just sitting around a desk and talking to each other, give them a question, talk to the person next to you, go up and go and find someone else. And all of these little things, we can increase movement. It doesn't always have to be a really kind of thought out planned thing that's going to take us hours of our precious time as teachers to put together. There's sort of little changes that we can make. I was working with a school recently who one of the teachers has banned putting hands up in the lesson, and if you want to answer a question, you have to stand up, and she'll do like little kind of true or false quizzes throughout the lesson. So they'll stop and reflect on what they've learned, and she'll say, right, stand up if you think it's true, stand up if you think it's false. And it's not going to be a complete game changer, but that, amongst a lot of other things, is just a little way of increasing that movement within the classroom. And the more of that we can do, the better for our kids with ADHD. So yeah, definitely we need to kind of increase movement as much as possible for a variety of reasons. We're talking about health benefits and things, but especially for those with ADHD who will have that need to move. There's a really interesting study, you can find it on YouTube, done by the University of Central Florida. You may well have seen it. So they've got the same boy, he's got a diagnosis of ADHD on 2 different days. And it's like a split screen. On the left, he's been asked to read a set of instructions to complete a maths task. And on the right, he's been asked to read a set of instructions to play a Star Wars game. Now, in neither video is he actually doing the task, he's just reading the instructions. And they did a 10-minute time lapse of both side by side. So on the right, when he's reading about the Star Wars game, he is pretty much sat still. He does a little bit of fidgeting with his hands. And then on the left, when he's reading about the maths, he just does not stop moving. He's swinging around on the chair. He's reading upside down. At one point, he just doesn't stop the whole time. He's moving constantly. And then what they did afterwards was they then asked him to go and complete both tasks to see if he understood and to see if he had read and comprehended those instructions. And what was interesting was that he was able to do both. So he had read and understood the instructions on the right, and he had read them and understood them on the left as well. And often we might see that child in a classroom on the left will probably be told to sit still and stop moving. And, it might be distracting for other people swinging around on his chair. But what it does show us is that in order to concentrate, if he's not interested in something, and the reason that he was able to sit still on the right is because he's got that emotional reward, he's got that dopamine hit because he's interested in what he's reading, probably looking forward to playing that game as well. If he's interested in something, probably not going to need to move as much. But if he's not interested in something, and let's face it, we're not always going to get them interested in everything, allowing that movement is really, really key. And it's actually the movement that increases the flow of dopamine for him, enables him to concentrate better and enables him to focus. But as I've said, he'd probably be told to sit still in a classroom. So if we're increasing that need for movement, we're reducing the amount of times that they're going to need to be swinging around on that chair. If we're kind of increasing those endorphins and increasing that transmission of dopamine as much as possible, it's really going to help. And often when I talk to teachers about maybe movement breaks, one of the concerns, and I suppose it's a valid concern from a teacher, would be that if I'm giving them a movement break every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes, they're going to miss out on a load of learning, which I understand that concern and I kind of get it. But my argument would be, if you've got someone who has that need for movement, that neurological need for movement, and maybe they struggle with their attention as well, and they have some of those inattentive characteristics of ADHD, if you expect them to sit for an hour, even if they can do a good job of masking and pretending that they're concentrating and pretending that they're doing the work, they're probably going to lose a lot more from distraction than if we give them short 10-minute bursts and then maybe a quick movement break or whatever works for them. And I think often for teachers, I would recommend just trusting that process and giving it a go and seeing the difference. And most teachers that we work with will say that having those kind of short bursts and that movement break for certain kids, they've seen a massive difference. And yes, they might be a reduction in the quantity of work that they're getting through, but just because of time, but certainly the quality is a lot better because they're just working with that person's brain rather than against it, I suppose.
Excellent. Absolutely. Amazing. We've covered so many things. I've been skimming through some of the questions that I had for you. Some of my listeners had submitted to us before. I think a few more questions around kind of the long-term goals for students with ADHD. Do we need to be setting long-term goals, ensuring that, they achieve success beyond just being in secondary school? Some questions around transition from moving from secondary into further education, such as college or university. Probably if you are able to just quickly give us a quick.
Yeah, that's fine.
So let's start with the last one there. I just mentioned about that transitioning from secondary to further education. I'm assuming some of these things apply that we're talking about for young people moving from primary to secondary school, but certainly, obviously, developmentally, at that age, they'll be slightly much more mature at that stage, and depending on where they're moving to, it's not as anxiety-provoking, if you like, compared to a big environment such as a secondary school. So,
and it can, and it's different for everyone, of course, and then sometimes that kind of move into further education can. Once we've been in it for a week, it can cause even more anxiety. So for me, when I was, I remember so I got diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, so I didn't know, and when I was younger, and I remember going to university, and I feel like I kind of coasted my way through school a little bit, and then when I got to sixth form, I noticed that I was starting to find things a little bit difficult, but the subjects I chose for my A-levels were quite interesting. So I did drama because I was, performing all the time and just able to kind of move and do things physically. I did music technology because I was kind of interested in music production at the time. And I did history as well. And history is what I went on to do at uni. And it was the only kind of academic subject that I really enjoyed. And the reason that I enjoyed it was because I had a really good relationship with my history teacher, and he kind of got me and understood me and really helped me. So I ended up doing well in history. So I went on to do it at uni. But I think one thing that kind of I noticed was when I went into further education is that more expectation on independence. And because, especially if it's undiagnosed earlier on, there can be an expectation that, well, you're 16, 17, 18 now, that you should be able to do this independently. And that you can feel a little bit lost sometimes, and that can affect self-esteem. I certainly remember my music technology A-level. I think the thing that kind of sums me up best is we had a coursework side of it, which accounted for half the marks. And that was kind of writing and producing music. And I got an A in that side of it. And then we had a written exam, which was all about independently revising and learning and making sure I was doing all that stuff. And I got a U in the exam. And I think that's just because I spelt my name right, to be honest. So there's that kind of sums it up for me. But because of that expectation of independence, I started to struggle. And certainly when I went to university, I remember that feeling really daunting, because I suddenly felt like any support that I'd had suddenly been stripped away. I'm lucky enough to have a very supportive family. I've moved away from them to a different city. I was kind of going back and just kind of being with people that I barely knew every night. And then just the kind of expectation on that independent learning was a real struggle for me as well. I remember having a conversation with one of my tutors early on, and I was only meant to be in lectures about 7 hours a week. And I said to him, what do you want me to do with the rest of my time? And he said, well, that's your time to study and learn and read. And I said, oh, right, okay. And I remember saying, well, how will you know if I've done it or not? And then he said, well, I won't. You're an adult. You're just expected to do it. And I just took that as, okay, I don't have to do it then. And then really kind of crammed everything in last minute every year through uni. So that can be hard. But in terms of advice, I think especially going into further education in the age there's so much great technology that we can use that can help us with our learning, with just day-to-day things like organisation. A few that I'd recommend. There's an app called ADDY ADHD, which has recently been developed. They were at our conference recently, which you were at. Now, their app is basically designed, it's an organisational tool designed for people with ADHD, so very much with that in mind. So they've taken a lot into consideration. Now, as I said, with the earlier kind of resource that I mentioned, we're not affiliated with any any kind of the apps that I recommend. We did do a little bit of work with Addy in terms of giving them some tips and advice on it, but I'm not kind of here to sell anything, and we don't get any sort of financial gain from any of these. But Addy ADHD, it's ADDIE, I would recommend. Helps with kind of reminders and organization and things like that, especially around like coursework and things. And another one that I'd recommend is called Boost, and that's Boost with 3 O's. You'll find it on the App Store. They've got a website that tells you a bit about it as well. And that's all around organization for someone with ADHD. It's specifically designed for kind of university students, but I think it's applicable for college students as well in terms of coursework that we've got to do. And it helps us manage deadlines. It breaks things down into small steps rather than having kind of just, 2,000 word essay on a to-do list and we just have to wait ages to tick that off. It breaks it down for us, and it really helps us to kind of, it coaches us through some of that as well. So I definitely recommend those two. And I think that's one of the things that can be really helpful going into further education is the older we're getting in that stage of development, we've probably got our own phone, we've probably got technology that we can use, and there's so much great stuff out there that we're maybe a little bit more free to use than we are in a classroom in a secondary school, for example. So it can be really hard, but then on the other side as well, that kind of, we might have grown in confidence by that stage, and the transition might feel daunting, but we might have grown in our confidence. We might remember, because it was only a few years ago, how effectively we did that transition from year 6 to year 7. And even though we're so much bigger now and we seem so much older now, it was only a few years ago that we were that kid with the huge backpack on that was weighing us down coming into year 7.
Yeah.
So I think just sometimes that can help as well, just that sort of emotional maturity developing further through the years can help us to manage those transitions a bit more effectively as well. But certainly just if we've got especially if we've got a diagnosis of ADHD, speaking to staff, and they will be aware of it. Universities and colleges do a great job of making sure that they are getting the best out of students and that they've got that support in place, and there'll be dedicated teams to go to speak about your concerns or any kind of extra provision that you might need, or any flexibility around deadlines or anything like that. So just making it known, and it can be hard to do that, and we might feel like, oh, I don't want to tell people I've got ADHD, but I think something that can be really empowering is actually owning it and talking about it in a positive light. And the more we do that, the more people are going to be able and willing to support us.
Lastly, I was just going to mention about a point that I've just spotted in one of the questions I had there on masking. This is, and we were touching on anxiety earlier. Some parents have their concerns about some of their children, that they've noticed that they might appear like they're coping. Certainly, if we base it on how they've been in like year 6 or primary school, and then they come home. I'm sure you understand the term masking, where the issues might not appear as apparent in one environment, and then in another environment they're completely showing the opposite. So some parents are kind of flagging up some concerns that how would I be able to pick up if my child is struggling, if based on how they've been previously with the masking. So again, the question is around, I think they're kind of looking out for the young person to say, how would I be able to pick up if they are struggling in school, if they're not really showing those issues in the school? But I suppose it's looking at the traits that they're then showing at home and looking at, are they, what? I'm trying to answer your question there, but I'll let you answer the question. Then I might add in a few things that I might want to add.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'll pass it over to you. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's definitely an area for concern. And I totally understand why parents are worried about it, especially when it comes to if someone's not got that diagnosis and we need that kind of presentation across more than one setting. Doesn't kind of take into consideration how many people with ADHD do mask. There's lots of research into masking and autism, and there's quite limited research into masking and ADHD, but there is some, and Russell Barkley's done some. He says around a third of people with ADHD are thought to mask, and same with autism. Girls tend to do it more frequently than boys, or tend to mask more frequently than boys. And it can be really hard if, they appear like they're fine in school all day and they come home and we're seeing that real emotion, and we're seeing how they really feel because they've spent so much energy all day just pretending they're absolutely fine. And they might seem like a swan gliding elegantly on the surface, but underneath it's chaos and they're really paddling away underneath. And that can often be very common for lots of people with ADHD. And it can be hard if the school don't see it that way. And I think the best thing that we can do is just try and point the school in the right direction. Talk about masking with the school, make sure they know about it, make sure they know that your child at home is really, really struggling, and they're really struggling with school, even if it doesn't appear that way. And I had so many kids in my class who I thought they loved school, and then they'd go home and it was clear that they didn't, and they were really struggling, but they were just hiding all day and doing an effective job of it, to the point where I just could not tell at all. So educating the school as much as possible. When we do training, we're always talking to the schools about masking and the importance of recognizing that, and the importance of, if a parent is saying to you frequently that they're really struggling at home, the chances are that they are masking, and there's things that we can do to help. So often when I'm talking to schools, I'll recommend some of the support strategies, just make as many as we can, make them for everyone, so that the person who's masking, they're still accessing those strategies, whether it's kind of directly to them or not. So talking to schools about that. But again, like I mentioned earlier, when we're having those conversations with school, going sort of equipped with knowledge and resources that we can point them to. Again, Attitude have got loads of great stuff on masking on YouTube. I mean, there's so much content out there about ADHD, which can be quite overwhelming sometimes. How to ADHD on YouTube is someone that I go to quite often. She's got a great video on masking and ADHD, somewhere to go as a starting point, and then maybe have some of those conversations with the school. And I think sometimes it might be helpful to sort of record evidence of that kind of up and down of emotion with them. So using some sort of journal or mood diary to sort of, you can ask them to write in how their day was at school, or they could say whether they were happy or not in school, whether it was a good day. And then you could say how they were at home that night. So they might say, yeah, I was calm all day in school and I was fine. But then they come home and they've had a complete breakdown. We can write that down. And then going, when we're having those conversations with the school, taking that with us as sort of evidence, I suppose, and saying, I'm not making it up. They're really, really struggling. And as we kind of alluded to earlier, majority of teachers will want to help if you say that to them, especially if you've got that kind of that evidence there and you're saying, I've got no reason to lie, I've got no reason to make this up. Yeah. They're really, really having a difficult time. And it's hard to argue with that when we've kind of got that that sort of in front of us. We can see clearly they're really, really struggling. So it's a massive issue. It's something that can be a real concern, but learning as much about masking as possible can help, and recording things and then trying to speak to the school about it as much as we can, and making sure that they do understand that masking is common in ADHD, and it's something that we need to consider and look at.
And understanding how ADHD presents is not all about the young person jumping up and down and kind of can't sit still, and that internal restlessness, which is obviously hard to pick up anyway. But there are other kind of avenues that ADHD present as done, rather than just the typical. Last two questions, I promise. One is on behaviour. Just again, if a parent is worried about the young person in terms of how they can, So I think the question is around, how do secondary schools prepare for a young person who has challenges, particularly with the behaviour, which has been noted in the primary school setting. If that's then presenting in a secondary school setting, I think that they're worried more that this school, secondary school, might take more of a hard stance, just because of, it's a bigger school environment. They expect more from the young people at that stage. Behaviour is definitely a bigger one. I'm sure when you do your training in schools, that's something that tends to come up quite a lot in terms of how they'll be asking you, like, what are we meant to do, in terms of if we have a young person who's really, really struggling. What's your advice on that?
Yeah, it's something that it's probably the most commonly asked question that we get from teachers is around behaviour and kind of what do we do about it? They feel like, we've got this understanding of ADHD. We maybe know why they're doing things sometimes, but what do we do with it? How do we manage it? I think, firstly, especially if they're joining us in year 7 and we know that they've had some issues with behaviour in primary school, I think one thing that is absolutely key for a teacher is having positive expectations every single time and starting a fresh slate every single time. So not expecting that, okay, they're going to behave badly in this class because if we go in with that attitude, we're going to notice things that we might not have noticed otherwise, and we're going to pick up on things, and we're going to hone in on things that maybe with other kids we might let go. So just having that kind of positive expectation all the time, and whatever's happened the day before, today's a new day, they're going to have a great day. And then obviously if things come up, there's ways of dealing with it. So I think going back to what we were speaking about before around that kind of the limbic system and the frontal cortex and which part of the brain they're operating from, I think that's important to consider with ADHD, is that when we see a big emotional breakdown or something that might lead to difficulties with behavior, just thinking about when we actually have the conversation with them and what is the right time to have the conversation with them. And often if we're seeing big emotions, they're not operating from the part of the brain that allows them to think logically, allows them to rationalize things, allows them to reason with things. They're often operating from the part of their brain that is all about panic and fear and raw emotions. So if we're trying to reason with someone who is not operating from the part of the brain that allows them to do that, it's just going to make things worse. And if we start introducing consequences at that point as well, that can often extend the period of time that they're feeling these big emotions. And we might well need to talk about consequences, and we might well need to discuss that, but wait until they feel calm again, and wait until they're in that right headspace to have those conversations, I think is really important. I think just kind of sometimes it can be important for schools to be a little bit flexible with things. And, I think sometimes there's a bit of a worry when we speak to schools. Teachers will often say, but we feel like you're just making an excuse for the behaviour and things. And that's absolutely not what we're suggesting. And by no means are we suggesting that no one is held accountable for any of their actions ever. Of course, there is a accountability that comes into it. And, we're not trying to make it an excuse for things. It may well be a reason. It's not necessarily an excuse. And we are still, accountable for our actions. But I think just having a bit of flexibility sometimes and being a bit understanding. I was working with a young girl recently who was getting a detention every single day because she didn't have a tie and she didn't have a pen, and the school had a very kind of hardline policy on you must bring your own tie, you must wear a tie, and you must have a pen for every lesson. So when we were working with the school, I said, do you know what, it might be easier to just give her a pen when she comes into the lesson, or it might be easier to just give her a tie. And some of the kind of pushback I got from that was, but then she's not learning, and she's not learning to remember it. And then my sort of counter argument to that was, well, she's not learning the other way either, because she's getting detentions every single day and she's still forgetting the tie, she's still forgetting the pen, because she has those executive functioning difficulties. And if that's not working, if we're being consistently punished, in my opinion, if it's the same punishment, the same thing all the time, it's not working, because the idea is to try and learn from it and not do the same thing in the future, or put a different strategy in place to help us. But if we're getting in trouble or getting punished for, or getting sanctioned for the same thing all the time, then we maybe need a different approach, and it's not necessarily working. So I think a bit of flexibility and a bit of understanding, and having those, we will have those boundaries, and we'll have that kind of, we know what they can do, what they can't do, and then having that understanding. I think with kids with ADHD as well, one thing that we often recommend is just having those rules displayed somewhere, keeping them really clear, really concise, really to the point, not too wordy, not too fluffy, but having them displayed, because we know lots of kids with ADHD can struggle with memory, especially short-term and working memory. So if we've got something there that's just a constant reminder, something to refer to, and we're not just relying on them to remember all of these rules that they've got to abide by on the top of their head, just having that physical reminder as well. But I think a lot of it comes with the understanding that we're not suggesting that no one is ever held accountable for anything. And, I don't think anyone ever suggests that. But often that's what people think that we're trying to suggest. It's not really, it's just about having a bit more flexibility and a bit more understanding, and thinking about, actually, if they are clearly very emotional, is now the right time to start talking about detentions and things? Or do I maybe wait until they feel calm and we can try and identify what's caused them? Because there's always going to be a trigger, and sometimes they harder to spot others. But having those productive conversations and that kind of positive practice, if you like, rather than just focusing on the punishment and the sanctions and the negatives, having that sort of that positive mindset of, this has happened, but something good's going to come out of this, because when he feels calm or when she feels calm, we're going to have a really productive conversation. We're hopefully going to find out what triggered them to start reacting like that. And then we can see what we can do to prevent it happening in the future. So just trying to change our outlook, I suppose, can help. And then for parents, just knowing that is often recommended as best practice for schools, and thinking about maybe having that at home as well, and that kind of consistency at home and school, and making a point for both teachers and parents of, it can be easy to focus on the negatives sometimes, but making a real point of specific positive praise. So when we can see that person who really struggles to not interrupt you when you're talking, if they've clearly stopped themselves from doing it, you can see it, just making a point of going over and saying, well done, I'm really happy that you did that. Well, well done for resisting that urge to do it. And just reinforcing the positives rather than just always punishing the negatives is often a much better way of dealing with behaviour.
You just mentioned one thing I wanted to bring up there, the impulse control, the impulsivity that ADHD brings, that most of the challenges that you'd find in a school setting, for example, is as much as they can have all these things in place to try and mitigate certain situations of things happening with these students with ADHD, you can't prevent the impulsivity and the mood that they're in. So mood, impulsivity, and then you add the relationship the young person has with that teacher in the classroom, which can then cause the behaviour in some extent, or the young person's relationship with another young person in the classroom, or peers, or something that could have happened or triggered them. So there's all these different avenues. Whereas if you're a teacher and you're trying to have to unpick what's causing what, and you can see how it can be quite a challenging situation. I was going to mention about the behavioural policy. That's obviously, I think you touched on that the school have a certain stance that any behaviour they have to treat, or there will be sanctions or repercussions based on whatever the behaviour is. And then you're trying to draw a line with a young person with neurodiversity needs and try and work out, where do you kind of say, okay, I'll just let this go, or do we then have to use the behavioural policy? What I tend to find is the behavioural policy is used very often. In some situations, you're right, the reason that it doesn't seem that there's much flexibility. But how do they work out where to kind of draw the line between making some sort of a leeway with someone with ADHD and kind of go, okay, we can give them a pen, or let's just give them a warning on this occasion, versus another young person that doesn't have ADHD doing the same thing and being treated in a different way.
Yeah, it can be really difficult, and by no means suggesting we just scrap behaviour policies and not think about it at all. But it can be really hard, and we have to kind of draw lines somewhere, I suppose, and it can be really difficult. I think that's really interesting, your last point there, and that can sometimes be the challenge with especially some of the kids I work with, is that the teacher might be a little bit more flexible with them, and they might say give them a pen, for example, with the girl that I was thinking of before. They might be a little bit more flexible with them, and then they might not be as flexible with someone else. And then sometimes what hasn't helped is the young person that I'm working with will then go and brag to that person that I got away with it, and it just kind of ruins the whole thing for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it can be really, really difficult. And I think it's not necessarily, okay, they never have to bring a pen in again. But if we notice that actually this is something that they're doing every single day, have that conversation with them and say, look, I'm going to provide you with a pen. Rather than for her, she was getting her detention every single day for forgetting her pen and forgetting her tie. So one thing we were doing was saying, so she came in on Monday, she forgot it. And we'd say, right, okay, you've forgotten it today. I'm going to give you a pen today. I'm going to give you a tie today. If you forget again tomorrow, then we may be going to have to look at not just automatically giving you one, and maybe look at the policy that we already have in place. So when I say flexibility, it's not necessarily kind of scrap it all, but it's more kind of, give them a chance, give them an initial chance, and then work with it. And I think within that time as well, what we were doing with this young girl was, on the Monday, it would be, right, okay, I'll give you the pen, I'll give you the tie today. Then tomorrow we might have a different response, but what can we do to make sure you remember it tomorrow, and what can we do? So having kind of whatever reminder apps that she uses on her phone and putting it on there so it goes off when she gets at night, as soon as she gets home, puts it in her bag. And rather than just kind of expecting the worst and then punishing the worst, thinking about, yeah, that might happen, but what can we do to try and help her to remember, and what can we do to try and help her to not forget, and putting those things in place as well. And rather than just waiting for something to happen and punishing, is there anything that we can do to support, and is there anything that we can do to stop it happening in the first place? And it might be just using reminder apps, or it might be trying to get into a routine. It might be speaking to someone at home and helping them to, get everything out the night before that she needs for the next day, and then before long it becomes a habit if it's something we're doing every day. That's just obviously one example. And I think one thing that can be difficult as well when it comes to sort of leeway and strategies for those with ADHD is the feeling of other kids in the class. And it's something that's quite common, is that other kids might say, well, why do they get to do that because I don't? Or why do they get to have that standing desk? Or why do they get to have a movement break if I don't? And I think as a teacher, I think the best thing we can do, I think firstly, is some of the support strategies we can just make a universal thing. So movement breaks, for instance, really great for kids with ADHD, certainly not going to do any harm to someone without ADHD. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that we pinpoint certain kids. Helps with those kids that are masking as well, like we've already mentioned. And I think just trying to increase the understanding of neurodiversity and increase the empathy around neurodiversity in school can really help as well. So I will often say to kids that I'm working with, who will maybe say about other kids in the class, well, they get that and they get this, but it's just exactly the same as a child in a wheelchair will probably have ramps to access certain buildings in the school, and they have a lift that they can use. And it's the same thing, and it can be really hard to change some of those attitudes sometimes, but we know that ADHD is a neurological condition, and it can't be helped, and it's the way that their brain works. It's the way that their brain's developing. So just as we would help someone who is physically disabled and we put support in place, and we often wouldn't question that, it's the same for invisible difference as well. And I think just trying to talk about neurodiversity with young people is the first step in that. But I think that's kind of not going to be an overnight shift, and I think that's a cultural shift that is going to take many years to kind of move towards, but it's what we're all trying to do, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that invisible difference that you mentioned there, that's the key word, and I agree. I think that's what confuses some people to some extent, not just other students, but even grown-ups as well. They might see something and go, okay, right. But it's not the invisible difference, it's the inconsistency with some of these traits that we're describing. So, in one situation, the young person is able to bring their pen, come on time, sit on the desk, not interrupt. In another situation, they might present in a completely different way, which tends to then throw, in a school setting, for example, the teachers, that 1 minute they can do it. So that then throws this whole debate around, so they can do it, they're choosing not to do it. Yeah. But as we know, that's typically what ADHD, I know it's another conversation that I'm opening up here, but that's basically what ADHD is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that consistent inconsistency, isn't it?
Exactly.
There's a really, I'm annoyed that I can't remember who it was, but there's a really great quote that I read recently, which was, someone with ADHD does something right twice and we hold it against them for the rest of their lives. And it's just that, no, you can do this, you did it the other week, but we know with executive functioning, with working memory, with differences in mood, and kind of going from being maybe on top of the world to feeling really low, all of those things have an impact, and often results with ADHD is that kind of imbalance and consistency. And I think for teachers, just knowing that and understanding that if someone with ADHD can do something 1 week, it doesn't mean that they've now mastered it and they can do it all the time. And I think it's patience that's needed a lot of the time. And it can be really hard, but I think the more patience that someone's got with someone with ADHD, the more likely they are to be successful, because that anxiety reduces. And actually, when we let go of some of that stress and some of that frustration around they could do it last week, they can't do it this week, actually we're creating an environment where that person feels less anxious and feels more comfortable. And ironically, that's the thing that's probably going to help them to be a little bit more consistent with some of the stuff as well, because the anxiety plays a big part in that. So it's a bit of a kind of a sort of a catch-22, I suppose, is that sometimes we can be really stressed about that, but actually that stress and that punishment that they might be kind of receiving for that can actually result in more inconsistency and more difficulties with that. So it's a really hard balance to get, but I think patience is absolutely key.
It's the performance as well. I think you mentioned it yourself, that what you find is that whereby you are under that stress and you leave something done to the last minute, that would then allow you to be able to then put all your effort in something and channel all your energy into it, and to some extent succeed and get an A or whatever. But so that's where the inconsistency can come in, where yes, I'm doing it, but it's the amount of work and stress and anxiety and late nights and everything that I'm having to sacrifice to be able to just achieve something that anyone without neurodiverse issue difference would be able to just perform without having to work extra hard. It's like running a marathon, and someone who's literally like trained for months and months and months, and someone just turned up and just wins the race. So that's I know we're moving away from transitioning here, but it's a fascinating area that I wanted to discuss with you. Last question, really, just about any final words of advice or encouragement to advise for students really that have ADHD in terms of this transitional period. So anything else that you want to maybe mention to them? Any kind of words of encouragement before we run things up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think firstly, just remembering that, in my opinion anyway, ADHD is I'm proud to have ADHD. I think there's so many positive traits that come with it, not to undermine the sort of difficulties, but I think remembering that actually being able to think a little bit differently, being able to think outside the box, being really passionate and hyper focused on things that you're interested in, they're all fantastic traits. And when you go into the world of work, it's all things that people look out for, and people, they want to see someone who is passionate, who is enthusiastic, who is kind of able to think on their feet quite quickly. And a lot of those negatives around impulsivity and things, there's also positive things that come with that. So we might act without thinking sometimes, we might speak without thinking, but actually it means that we can be really spontaneous and really quick on our feet, which are both positive traits to have as well. So I think just remembering that it's not all about the negatives, and while we may struggle with some things, there's so many positive traits that come with having ADHD. There's so many successful people out there with ADHD. You only have to do a quick Google search to find so many. Michael Phelps is always a great example for me, the most successful Olympian of all time. He's got ADHD. Really, I read recently he got kicked out of a couple of swimming clubs when he was younger because of things that he was struggling with his ADHD. He was lucky enough to get a coach that knew how to kind of nurture him and support him and get the most out of him. So I think remembering those positives and then remembering the things that we struggle with as well, there's so much that we can do to help, and going into that new environment with the positive attitude that that you're not going to get on with every single teacher, but there are going to be lots of staff there that are there to support you and have got your best interests at heart, and feeling like it's okay to actually express what you need. And it's something that I didn't do for a very long time, and I've only started doing now as an adult, but something I often recommend to children and young people is it's absolutely okay to tell people what you need and to express that you might be struggling. And I think especially if we're masking, we can spend a lot of time just pretending that we know what we're doing, everything's fine, because we kind of feel like we need to show that we're perfect, but no one's perfect, and asking for help is absolutely a completely normal thing to do and a really positive thing to do as well. So I've gone on a bit there, I suppose, in terms of final words. But yeah, just remembering the positives, remembering there's things that we can do to support the negatives. And in terms of that kind of specific worry about transition, everyone will be feeling an element of anxiety around starting that new school, especially if, going from year 6 to year 7, everyone will be nervous about it. And even if people say that they're not, they probably are. And that's just their way of dealing with it, is to pretend that they're not. And that's just their way of getting through it. And knowing that it seems like the kind of the be all and end all now at this point in time, but it won't be long before you look back on it and it will seem like nothing, and it will seem like so much has changed and you've got so used to it, and you won't even it will feel like being in primary school is a distant memory. So things move quickly and we get used to things very quickly. And once we've taken that first step, it just gets easier from there.
Absolutely. And finally, just in terms of your how people can reach out to you if they need to find out more about yourself. I know you obviously run the training through the ADHD Foundation. Do you want to maybe tell us your website, and if you're happy to share your email address as well?
Yeah, that's fine. So our website is ADHD Foundation I think if you Google ADHD Foundation,
yes, it is.
Yeah, thanks. So that's our website, and then my email address. More than happy to kind of share any resources, any advice, anything like that. It's Arron, so it's ARRON .Hutchinson HUTCHINSON at ADHDfoundation.org.uk. So if you're a parent wanting kind of advice, if you're a teacher interested in training, anything, if you just want to kind of pick our brains at the foundation about something, because if I don't have the answer, the likelihood is that somebody else will, and I can pass you on to the right person. I'd welcome you to get in touch, and we'd be more than happy to help in any way that we can.
Excellent. And send my regards to Colin.
I will, certainly will.
Yeah. So you obviously came on board because I used to know Colin really well. I still know Colin, but Colin for a long time, and then you kind of took over and you working sort of under Colin's sort of wing.
Yes.
So
Colin's like so what happened was we started getting a lot more demand for, so it used to be that our demand for training was all from education, and the majority of it still is, but now around a third of it is from businesses wanting to kind of know how to support people with ADHD or people who are neurodiverse in the workplace. So we got a lot more demand from that, and Colin needed to kind of move away to do a lot more of that. So in theory, Colin does a lot of the business stuff. I do a lot of the education stuff now. Colin's my boss, but there's a lot of crossover at times in terms of diaries and stuff. I kind of came on board to kind of help out. They needed an extra pair of hands, I suppose, for the education side of things. So I came on board. Colin, and if you're interested in kind of business training as well, if anyone's listening to this, you can email me and I can put you in touch with Colin as well to help out with that.
Perfect. Excellent. Good to see you, Arron.
Yeah, you too, actually. Yeah.
And my regards to everyone at the foundation, and hopefully to see you guys soon. And enjoy the rest of your summer.
Thanks for having me on as well. I appreciate it.
No worries, Arron. Take care.
Cheers.
See you later.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.